At 3:17 in the afternoon, local time, somewhere across the wide blue stretch of the southern Caribbean Sea, the bridge of a United States Navy vessel was calm. The watch team was settled into the rhythm of a routine patrol. The sea was quiet. Visibility was clear. Nothing on the horizon suggested anything unusual. The ship was moving lawfully through international waters, holding a steady course and maintaining a predictable speed. To anyone outside the Navy, it might have looked like just another ordinary passage through open ocean. A gray ship, a flat horizon, and the kind of silence that makes the sea feel endless. But at sea, calm can change in seconds. On the radar display, a new surface contact appeared to the west, then another, then another. Within moments, the screen began to fill with returns. These were not scattered commercial vessels. They were not random fishing boats moving independently across the water. The pattern was too organized, the spacing was too deliberate. The movement had purpose. Inside the Combat Information Center, the picture became clear almost immediately. 7 Venezuelan naval vessels were moving toward the American ship. Their signatures matched military profiles. Their speed and course suggested coordination. Their approach was not slow, uncertain, or accidental. They were closing the distance with intent. This was not simple shadowing. This was an intercept. On the bridge, no one panicked. No voices rose. No one reacted emotionally. The crew had trained for moments like this, and now every movement followed procedure. The officer of the deck ordered the contacts logged. Bearings were recorded. Speeds were calculated. The closest point of approach began shrinking minute by minute. The Venezuelan vessels increased speed. One by one, they spread outward, forming a loose arc across the projected path of the American ship. It was not a wall, but it was close enough to send a message. The geometry was easy to read for anyone who understood maritime pressure. This is how tension is created at sea without crossing the most dangerous line. The U.S. Navy ship transmitted a message over bridge-to-bridge radio. The tone was professional, direct, and calm. This is a United States Navy vessel operating in international waters. You are approaching at high speed. State your intentions. There was no answer. A second call went out, then a third. The message was repeated in English and Spanish. Still nothing. At sea, silence is not always empty. Sometimes silence is part of the message. Inside the Combat Information Center, sailors watched every track in real time. Range rings tightened, speed vectors updated. 7 separate contacts were moving inward. 7 vessels were converging. At that distance, there was less and less room for misunderstanding. The captain was notified. He did not rush. He did not need to. The numbers already told the story. He had seen patterns like this before. Maybe not in that exact place and not on that exact day, but the method was familiar. This was a gray zone maneuver. Push close, apply pressure, force a visible reaction, create footage, shape the story afterward. But the U.S. Navy does not respond emotionally. It responds with discipline. Electro-optical sensors came online quietly. Cameras focused on the approaching vessels. High-definition imagery began streaming in. Hull markings, deck movement, crew activity, and the posture of each ship. Everything was time-stamped. Everything was recorded. This was not only about awareness, it was about proof. The American ship held its course. That decision mattered. Turning away too early could look like hesitation. Changing speed without need could create more risk. A sudden maneuver could give the other side exactly what it seemed to be looking for, a reaction that could be framed, edited, and interpreted. So the safest move was also the strongest move. Stay steady, stay predictable, stay professional. On radar, one Venezuelan vessel moved slightly ahead of the others. It accelerated more aggressively than the rest. Its bow angle shifted just enough to signal intent. The closest point of approach dropped below 5 nautical miles. That was close. Too close to dismiss as coincidence. The bridge team watched as the range kept ticking down. 4 miles, 3.5, 3. At that distance, small mistakes can become serious incidents. A late turn, a sudden speed change, a misunderstood signal, or even a moment of pride can turn open water into a dangerous place. The ocean does not care about politics. Steel, momentum, and distance follow their own rules. The American ship transmitted again. You are maneuvering in an unsafe manner. Alter course immediately. Still no response. 7 Venezuelan vessels. 1 U.S. Navy ship. Less than 10 minutes to the closest point of approach. This was the moment where restraint became a form of strength. Discipline was now the difference between control and chaos. At 3:21 p.m., the geometry became impossible to ignore. The Venezuelan vessels were no longer simply moving in the same general direction. They were maneuvering. Each ship adjusted course by a few degrees. Each speed change helped shape the space ahead of the American ship. From above, it would have looked like a tightening net. From the bridge, it felt like pressure closing in from multiple directions. This was not pursuit. This was containment. Inside the Combat Information Center, surface warfare coordinators called out updates in steady, precise voices. Bearings, speeds, ranges. Every number helped build a clearer picture of intent. The closest Venezuelan vessel was now less than 7 nautical miles away and accelerating past 20 knots. That speed mattered. In calm seas, 20 knots is not casual movement. It shortens reaction time. It compresses the space for decision-making. And most importantly, it sends a message without using words. The U.S. Navy ship remained steady, course unchanged, speed constant. That predictability was deliberate. In a close maritime encounter, sudden moves can invite miscalculation. Discipline preserves control. Another radio hail went out. Again, no reply. Through long-range optics, the approaching vessels became visible on the horizon, dark shapes against the bright line of the sea. Their silhouettes confirmed what the radar already showed: armed naval surface vessels, crew movement visible, bridge windows catching the afternoon sun. This was not an accidental meeting. The captain arrived on the bridge. He scanned the horizon once, then turned his attention to the displays. There was no dramatic order, no raised voice, no unnecessary movement. He asked one question. "Closest point of approach?" The answer came back immediately. "Under 3 nautical miles and still shrinking, sir." That changed the situation. International maritime practice requires vessels to maneuver early and clearly to avoid unsafe close-quarter situations. But the Venezuelan formation was doing the opposite. It was allowing the encounter to compress, forcing the American ship into a choice: yield space or hold position. Yielding might reduce tension in the moment, but it could also create a precedent. The U.S. Navy does not operate on impulse. It operates on rules, procedures, and decades of experience. The guidance was clear: warn, record, show presence, prepare controlled non-lethal responses. Below decks, the ship's systems were already ahead of the timeline. Electronic warfare teams quietly cataloged emissions from the approaching vessels. Radar activity, communication bursts, and signal behavior were logged. Nothing indicated an immediate direct action, but everything mattered. In modern naval encounters, information is power. On the flight deck, the air detachment received a quiet notice. There was no dramatic rush, no public display of urgency, just preparation. Helmets checked, systems powered, crew ready. The ship was building options without advertising them. At 3:25 p.m., the lead Venezuelan vessel changed course again. Only a few degrees, but enough to reduce the closest point of approach further. Now it was under 2.5 nautical miles. That crossed an invisible line. This was no longer passive pressure. It had become an unsafe approach. The American ship transmitted once more, the voice steady and unmistakable. "Venezuelan naval vessels, you are approaching a United States Navy vessel at unsafe distance. Alter course immediately." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. On the bridge, no one speculated. No one guessed motives out loud. The Navy does not assume intent when behavior can be observed. And the behavior was clear. 7 vessels, coordinated movement, closing distance. No communication. This was a textbook gray zone confrontation. Strong enough to intimidate, controlled enough to avoid open conflict, and designed to test discipline. The captain gave a measured order. "Prepare non-lethal escalation." That single sentence changed the posture of the moment. It did not mean aggression, it did not mean provocation, it meant visibility, awareness, and a controlled signal that the American ship understood exactly what was happening. A helicopter would provide that signal, not to threaten, not to chase, but to observe, document, and make the situation impossible to deny. As the deck crew moved with practiced precision, the Venezuelan vessels continued their approach. The closest one was now just over 2 nautical miles off the bow. The others trailed behind, still forming a loose barrier across open water. Time seemed to compress. Every mile mattered. Every decision carried weight far beyond what anyone on the horizon could see. This encounter was no longer about who would turn first. It was about who controlled the situation when no one crossed the final line. At 3:28 p.m., the helicopter lifted from the deck. There was no dramatic flare, no rushed movement. The launch was smooth, controlled, and deliberate. Exactly the way the U.S. Navy signals seriousness without creating unnecessary danger. As the aircraft cleared the ship, it banked forward, staying within international norms. Its rotors beat steadily over the water as it moved out ahead of the American vessel. This was escalation without aggression. From the bridge, the helicopter's track appeared on the display, placing itself between the American hull and the tightening arc of Venezuelan ships. It was not there to threaten, it was there to observe. Its sensors came alive. Electro-optical cameras locked in and streamed high-resolution imagery back to the ship in real time. Hull numbers, bridge crews, deck activity. Every detail captured, time-stamped, and geolocated. In the modern Navy, evidence can be just as important as force. The helicopter dropped lower, staying a few hundred feet above the water and well clear of every vessel. But it was close enough to be impossible to ignore. Anyone on the Venezuelan bridges could see it. Anyone on deck knew they were being watched. The U.S. Navy ship held course. That decision remained critical. Changing course now could be interpreted as retreat. Moving closer could invite miscalculation. Holding steady communicated confidence and control. It said, without saying it directly, "We are not surprised and we are not intimidated." The helicopter transmitted over the radio. Venezuelan naval vessels. This is a United States Navy aircraft operating in international waters. Your current maneuvers are unsafe. Alter course immediately. The message was repeated in Spanish. Still no reply. On radar, one Venezuelan vessel continued to press forward. Its speed fluctuated slightly as if testing boundaries, but the others began to show small signs of hesitation. Their tracks wobbled, tiny corrections appeared, speed reduced slightly. The formation was no longer perfectly synchronized. That mattered. Pressure works in both directions. Inside the Combat Information Center, analysts watched carefully. There were no signs of immediate hostile action, but the posture remained serious enough to require full attention. This was often the most unstable phase of a maritime encounter. The moment when neither side has stepped back and neither side wants to look uncertain. The helicopter entered a wide, controlled orbit. It never crossed directly over a vessel. It never moved in a reckless way. It maintained safe separation while keeping the situation visible and documented. The cameras continued recording. The ship's systems continued listening. This was not intimidation. This was documentation. At 3:31 p.m., a visible non-lethal warning signal appeared on the water near the path of the lead Venezuelan vessel. It did not touch the ship. It did not target personnel. Its purpose was simple. A clear line had been drawn. From the Venezuelan bridge, movement became visible. Figures stepped forward. Binoculars came up. A crew member gestured toward the helicopter. For the first time since the encounter began, the Venezuelan vessels acknowledged the situation, not by radio, but through behavior. Their speed began to drop. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to measure. 20 knots became 18, then 17. The formation loosened further. One vessel began a subtle turn away from the projected intercept path. Another lagged behind, creating space where minutes earlier there had been none. The closest point of approach stabilized. That shift was important. The U.S. Navy ship had not chased. It had not overreacted. It had not escalated beyond presence and controlled warning. And yet, the dynamics were changing. The pressure that was meant to force an American reaction was now forcing reconsideration from the other side. On the bridge, no one celebrated. This was not a victory scene. It was still a live encounter, and discipline still mattered. The captain kept his eyes on the horizon and issued quiet instructions. Maintain course. Continue recording. Hold posture. The helicopter stayed on station, calm and steady. At sea, restraint is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and disciplined. It is how control can be asserted without creating a larger confrontation. The Venezuelan vessels were no longer advancing with the same confidence. The real question now was whether anyone would choose to push the situation further. At 3:33 p.m., momentum shifted. It did not happen with a dramatic turn or an obvious withdrawal. It began as small adjustments on radar. Tiny changes in speed and bearing that only trained eyes would notice. But in close navigation, those small changes mean everything. The lead Venezuelan vessel slowed again. 18 knots dropped to 16, then 15. Its bow angle drifted a few degrees away from the intercept line. Not enough to look like a retreat, but enough to move out of the most dangerous geometry. Inside the Combat Information Center, the update came quickly. CPA increasing. That phrase carried weight. For the first time since the encounter began, the risk was no longer tightening. It was easing. The helicopter maintained its orbit. Cameras stayed locked. Every change in posture was recorded. This was the moment where behavior mattered more than words, and the Venezuelan ships were beginning to communicate through movement. One by one, the formation lost cohesion. A trailing vessel fell back, another shifted outward. The arc that had looked like a coordinated containment maneuver now looked uncertain. The pressure had reversed. The U.S. Navy ship did not exploit the shift. It did not accelerate. It did not turn toward the opening. It simply remained steady. That was the point. Control is not always about forcing the other side to move. Sometimes it is about denying them the reaction they were trying to create. At 3:35 p.m., the radio finally came alive. United States naval vessel. This is the Venezuelan Navy. We are conducting routine patrol operations in proximity to Venezuelan waters. It was not an apology. It was not a concession. But it was communication, and communication changed the tone. The American bridge responded immediately, still calm and measured. This is a United States Navy vessel conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your unsafe maneuvers have been recorded. No argument, no debate, just a statement of fact. The helicopter remained visible but non-threatening. It did not close distance. It did not increase pressure. It simply stayed present, a constant reminder that every action was still being observed. On radar, the Venezuelan vessels continued to slow. 14 knots, 13. The lead vessel adjusted course again, this time more clearly away from the American ship's path. The closest point of approach widened to 4 nautical miles, then 5. The intercept had dissolved into separation. The standoff was ending. On the bridge, the captain continued watching the plot carefully. He did not relax the ship's posture too soon. Close encounters can change quickly if discipline slips at the wrong moment. The order remained unchanged. Maintain course, maintain speed, continue recording. The helicopter completed one final orbit. Its cameras captured the Venezuelan ship's opening distance. Deck crews aboard those vessels were no longer clustered in visible groups. Personnel began returning to normal positions. The urgency was fading. At 3:38 p.m., the helicopter turned back toward the ship. It was not a victory lap. It was a signal that the situation was stabilizing. As the aircraft returned to the deck, the Venezuelan vessels were now well outside any unsafe distance. Their formation was loose, their speed reduced, and their maneuvering no longer carried the same pressure. The encounter was effectively over. No direct engagement, no collision, no uncontrolled escalation. Just a carefully managed confrontation that ended with control intact. But the significance went far beyond that moment. This was never really about one ship against 7. It was never about a dramatic tactical clash. It was about who would define the encounter, and on whose terms. The Venezuelan Navy had approached with numbers, speed, and proximity. It tried to shape the space around the American vessel through pressure. The U.S. Navy responded with discipline, documentation, and restraint. In modern naval operations, restraint is not weakness. It is authority. As the American ship continued along its original course, the Caribbean looked calm again. The water returned to its quiet rhythm. The horizon stretched out as if nothing had happened. But the data collected, the imagery recorded, and the message delivered would travel far beyond the sea. Because in this encounter, the most important maneuver was not a turn. It was not a speed change. It was not the helicopter's orbit. It was the decision to stay steady when everything else was designed to force a reaction. By 3:41 p.m., the Caribbean Sea looked almost exactly as it had an hour earlier. A flat horizon, steady wind, open water in every direction. From a distance, nothing remarkable appeared to have happened. But beneath that calm surface, the encounter had already been decided. The Venezuelan vessels continued on diverging courses. Their speeds returned to normal. Their formation had dissolved. No pursuit followed. The U.S. Navy ship did not turn to watch them leave. It did not change mission. It did not add drama to the moment. It maintained its original heading, its original speed, and its original purpose. That choice was intentional. In naval operations, what a ship does not do can matter just as much as what it does. Chasing would have changed the story. Turning could have invited interpretation. Remaining steady ended the chapter without adding unnecessary lines. Below decks, the work continued. Combat systems teams compiled the encounter logs, radar tracks, time-stamped imagery, radio transcripts, electronic signals, every maneuver, every speed change, every unanswered call. This was not theater. This was accountability. Modern maritime confrontations are not judged only in the moment. They are reviewed later by commanders, analysts, and decision-makers who need clean data, not speculation. And the data told a clear story. 7 Venezuelan naval vessels attempted to compress space around a U.S. Navy ship operating lawfully in international waters. The American response followed doctrine: warn, record, show presence, de-escalate, hold course, no improvisation, no emotional reaction. That consistency matters because gray zone operations thrive on ambiguity. The goal is often to push the other side into doing something visible, something that can be captured, edited, and turned into a narrative. But discipline denies that objective. The U.S. Navy's restraint did not reduce its capability. It demonstrated confidence. The helicopter launch, the controlled orbit, the visible documentation, and the steady course all sent the same message without crossing a dangerous line. The message was not simply move away. The message was, we see what is happening, we understand the situation, and we are prepared to manage it. When the Venezuelan vessels altered course, they were not necessarily admitting defeat. They were acknowledging reality. The risk of miscalculation had become greater than the value of continued pressure. That was the real turning point. Because once one side recognizes it can no longer shape events on its own terms, the encounter is already moving toward its end. From a strategic perspective, this incident fits a wider pattern seen across the world's oceans. Nations test boundaries not always through direct confrontation, but through proximity. They probe responses, they measure discipline, they observe reaction time, they test political tolerance. The U.S. Navy trains for exactly these moments, not simply to dominate, not to provoke, but to manage escalation and control outcomes. That training shows when a crew resists the urge to react aggressively. It shows when commanders trust procedures developed over decades. It shows when professionalism carries more weight than pride. There is no public ceremony for the quiet resolution of a tense maritime standoff. No dramatic announcement, no cinematic ending. But there is value in it. Value in keeping sailors safe. Value in preserving freedom of navigation. Value in proving that strength does not always need to be displayed loudly. As the U.S. Navy ship continued its patrol, the encounter became another entry in a long record of close approaches, calculated pressure, and disciplined restraint. Another reminder that modern naval power is not only about advanced systems or visible hardware. It is about judgment, and judgment carries consequences. Every encounter like this teaches lessons, not only to the crews involved, but to anyone watching from afar. Lessons about resolve, lessons about discipline, lessons about what happens when pressure meets control. In the end, the most decisive action taken that afternoon was not a dramatic maneuver, not a sharp turn, and not a loud warning. It was the decision to remain steady. In a world where one careless move at sea can grow into something much larger, that steadiness is not passive. It may be the strongest signal a Navy can send.